This Week in Startups is brought to you by 8 Sleep, the first bed engineered to improve your sleep through dynamic cooling and heating, detailed sleep tracking, and more. Get the sleep you deserve and supercharge your health and productivity at 8sleep.com/twist. And Zendesk. The best customer experiences are built with Zendesk. Qualifying startups can join their startup program and get Zendesk products free for a full year. Visit zendesk.com/twist today to get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of This Week in Startups. If you haven't noticed, the last couple of weeks, we've gone daily, 5 days a week. Why? Well, because we have so many great guests, and I'm a maniac who decided to do a couple of special episodes and series for you, the founders and investors who listen to this podcast. We love doing it, and one of the crazy ideas we had was to just go back to basics and say, hey, given what we've learned after a couple of hundred investments, after the majority of those investments going to zero and a couple of them going to the moon, what have we learned? What is the team at launch? It's a 15-person team here, and we have the Fantastic Four at this 15-person team. Those are the managing directors, 3 of them, and the president of the company. You've gotten to meet them during this special series called Scaling Your Startup. And we've been listening to your feedback, which has been tremendous on the social media, the Twitter, et cetera, and YouTube. And what you told us was the funding your company, which was the first part of this 10-part series, was the most important one for you, and you wanted us to go deeper. So today, in part 7 of Scaling Your Startup, we're going to do fundraising, diving into the details. We like to give tactical advice. Now, there'll be big picture advice we're going to give from time to time, but you all want tactical advice. And from the tactical advice that I find and the stories we have, it reinforces the big picture advice of why people invest in startup companies. You can get the slides from the series, which we're editing in real time. So when you tell us you have a question or a follow-up question, or you have a link and you want us to get into more details, we're going to keep updating this Google Slides deck in real time. You can see the deck that we're working from at this moment at thisweekinstartups.com/scale. thisweekinstartups.com/scale. With me today, again, the managing director of our accelerator, which is called the Launch Accelerator, Jason Demant, is with us, and the managing director of thesyndicate.com, Ashley Whitehurst. Your last name is Whitehurst, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Good job.
It took 5 years.
4
5 years. I realized when I was like, I don't think I've ever said your last name. And I was like, do I know how to pronounce Whitehurst? I was like, I do. Okay, good. Welcome back on the pod. Feedback has been good.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Let's do it again.
Lots of new LinkedIn connections.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, because we actually put your social media links, et cetera. Okay, so when we did the first part in this 10-part series, it was funding your company. Then we went on to communication. We then talked about business models, building your team, sales in episode 5, staying lean, super important because you don't have a lot of resources when you're a startup. And now we're going to go back to the first topic we started with, which was funding. Let's start with our first slide here, which is the fundraising process. We've gone through this process now with hundreds of companies, and we've seen a lot of pain and suffering, and we've seen a lot of great success. Let's start with the process that we train people on here at Launch. We will call this the launch process.
Yeah. So we're starting with the assumption here that you've watched our first fundraising 101 video. So you know that you want to raise money from VCs. You understand your metrics. You have a good idea of what you want to raise and have reasonable expectations about your valuation. So Ashley, let's start off and talk about what are the standard numbers that we see across a fundraise.
Yeah, so we'll start at the top of the funnel. We have founders research and reach out to about 150 investors.
Wow, big number.
So, yeah, it's a big number. And you know, we say that to manage some expectations because you really do. It's a long process. It can take, up to 6 months really to go through this entire process. So we'll get into a little bit more detail on how to source those 150 investors in a little bit. But that's your starting point, reaching out to 150 investors. Then the next is 50 to 75 in-person meetings. In-person meetings can be a phone call, a Zoom meeting or GoToMeeting, or coffee. in
Got it.
person. So you're taking that first 150, you're narrowing that down, or they're narrowing you down to about 50 to 75 in-person meetings.
75, 50% seems incredibly ambitious.
It is.
I think 50 would be more realistic, Demant.
Yeah. You're probably right. But I think I think it is possible to get towards the upper end, and then obviously your top of funnel may be a little bit higher as well.
Got it. Okay. So you want to get to you want to be able to find 150 targets and get a meeting. Here we say in person, but really it's just a meeting. It could be virtual, it could be in person. Of let's say 50, 1 out of 3. That makes total sense. And a lot of these new investors, especially the young funds, they like to do a Zoom or a GoToMeeting for the first meeting. I hate that. I don't do that. Maybe I need to change, but I find it super inefficient to not be able to look the person in the eye and have that rapport. But I guess different strokes for different folks.
The data actually supports you for our investments because we haven't made an investment in a GoToMeeting or Zoom meeting. So it's only been in person.
Yeah, I mean, but
for us,
I have heard of people making investments having never met the person in person. The founder in person, which sounds crazy to me. But I guess if you were an angel making a 10 or 25K investment, it's not that big of a deal. But for any venture firm, any raise 250, 500K from an investor, you should assume a couple of in-person meetings. So let's keep going down the funnel.
So then the next is 10 firms in diligence.
Got it.
So you want to narrow that down. And I say you're narrowing it down, they're narrowing you down too, but you want to make sure it's a good fit for you. So you want to pick the 10, that are interested, because all 50 or 75, of course, will be interested. So you'll get to pick those 10 that you go into diligence with. And that's usually, diligence process, which we'll also get into a little bit later, starts very early, but this is more the legal diligence we're talking about. So this is, you really
formal
want
due diligence.
Formal due diligence.
So people might say, I'm doing my due diligence. They use the product. They checked out your website. They Google research your competitors. That is kind of a broad, light due diligence. When we say due diligence, and we mean a sort of a formal process, what would that formal process look like? What could we expect if you got to a formal due diligence process with a venture firm? What would be the top 4 or 5 things they would ask for?
So we're actually going to talk about that a little later and get to much more detail. But in this, for some terms that make more sense, we're talking about financial and legal diligence that you're getting into these 10. It's not the
you want
sort
your
of
corporate
market size.
documents, you want your bank statements, P&L. They might even do a background check on the founder to make sure you don't have felonies and they didn't get into business with a felonious person.
Yes.
Demant, when you look at this in-person meetings, there seems to be something we track at the accelerator, which is second meetings, follow-up meetings. Let's say we go with 150 emails and introductions going out, 50 meetings, in-person or virtual. Of those 50, what would be a target to get to a second meeting? And maybe we'll update the slide with second meetings as part of this funnel.
Sure.
What would the second meeting percentage look like for an average company? Not a top, not a...
I think on average it would be around 50%.
50?
Yeah.
Okay, so we go 150 top of the funnel. You've identified 150 leads. You got meetings with 50, let's say, and then you might get a second meeting with 25 of them.
Yeah.
And then maybe you get into diligence with 10.
Yep.
That would be ambitious as well. 8 Sleep is the first bed engineered to improve your sleep. Now, there are a ton of apps out there and government funding and products all focused on exercise and nutrition. These things are super important. Well, that's great, but there is one piece that is massively overlooked, and that is sleep. It is as important as exercise and nutrition. And you know this to be true. When you get a bad night's sleep, even after you've worked out and eaten your salad, you're going to be grumpy the next day. You're going to make bad decisions. We spend 1/3 of our lives in bed, so you need to maximize and optimize that time you're spending sleeping. And in business, we are so focused on being efficient and working optimally that 8 Sleep has applied that same mindset to sleeping. The features include temperature control on both sides of the bed through dynamic thermoregulation, and a thermo alarm will wake you up naturally with high-tech sensors to track sleep time, sleep phases, and more. My bed was delivered today, and I am stoked to try it tonight. I cannot wait to get in that bed and try it out. So supercharge your health, productivity, and your performance as an entrepreneur or angel investor, and get the sleep you need and deserve by heading to 8sleep.com/twist. 8EIGHT sleep.com/twist. Try the product free for 100 days. You got nothing to lose. That's 8sleep.com/twist. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode.
So then the last is, team members. You're going to have multiple meetings. You're going to meet between 3 and 4 team members in a given fund. I mean, of course, this isn't the same for an angel investor.
Yeah.
But when you're working with firms, you're going to meet
a seed
more
fund
partners.
might have 2 partners, and a big fund might have 6 or 8, and you would probably meet all of them. So here, what would be helpful is we should update this slide to just show the percentage from 1, 2, 3, and maybe we could even do a running percentage. So from the top of the funnel of 150, you might get into diligence with 10, and then what might somebody in this process expect in terms of term sheets, Demant, in your experience?
In terms of how many term sheets?
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want, right?
Yeah. So you would ideally shoot for 4 to 5. So of the diligence, those in the diligence phase, you would hopefully get, again, around 50% of those in terms of term sheet.
Okay.
And then some of them are going to be compatible and some of them aren't in terms of the ownership expectations.
So again, that seems super ambitious to me, but okay, 150 top of the funnel, 50 in-person first meetings, or 50 first meetings, in-person or digital. We'll update that slide. Second meetings, maybe 25, go into diligence with maybe 10, meet 3 or 4 of the team members, and maybe you wind up in an ideal situation with 5 term sheets.
Oh, yeah, 3 to 4 term sheets.
Okay, let's put 3 to 4.
Yeah.
Perfect. So what that means is net, after you identify 150, you might wind up with a 1 to 4 or 5% chance of getting a term sheet, or 1 in 50 would feel pretty good. 1 in 50 that you reached out to, 1 in 25 you met with.
Yep.
And what's interesting about this, I think, is where the process stalls. So let's talk about the stalling. Do we talk about that later in the deck, or should we just talk about it here? Because I do think different types of companies stall at different points. I know some companies we've had only have 20 or 30 firms in their funnel, and they get 3 or 4 term sheets. And then some of them have 150 in their top of funnel, and they don't even get 10 meetings.
Sure.
So why don't you describe the stall out between 150 contacts and not getting any meetings? Why would that happen? What are some of the reasons somebody might find 150 really good targets? I'm a mobile enterprise software company, and I found enterprise investors, but they're not even responding to my email. What is it that I've done wrong in that case?
Let's say the most common ones we see, and probably not in particular order, would be growth. So not growing fast enough.
What would be the growth that would be fast enough to get an investor to take a meeting? What's the growth that would make them go, eh? And what's the growth that would make them go, no?
Sure. So, 20% month-over-month growth in general is an exciting pace. And that's typically where we feel if a company of ours is growing that fast, we feel very confident that they're going to be able to raise that next round.
So I made 50,000 in January.
Mm-hmm.
February, I made 60.
Yep.
And then in March,
72.
I made 72.
Yep.
Got
exactly.
it. And somebody sees that chart, 50, 60, 72. And if your product costs $5,000 a month, it means you added, 2 customers a month or something.
Yep. And then kind of the mid-range would be probably 10 to 15%, where it's like, okay, it's good. Can you accelerate it? What is the trend? What is the trend been? If it's trending down, that's challenging. If it's trending up, that might be more exciting. So you have to kind of look at it in the longer term. And then under 10% is really hard to raise from venture investors.
And what's going through their mind, Ashley? Because we send these deal memos. Mm-hmm. Do we see that correlation when we do a syndicate deal? Faster growth, doubling every 3 to 6 months does better than doubling year over year?
Sure. I mean, growth is always helpful.
Yeah.
Seeing a chart that is up and to the right is always helpful. I mean, I think with the syndicate, because there are angel investors who are seeing many deals and able to opt in where they'd like, I think a little bit more comes into play with the exact market that they're in, whether or not they can be helpful, and if the market is exciting. Whereas venture firms, I think it's a little bit, it's less based
about
on
excitement,
yeah,
or
about excitement,
affinity
about,
for the product, or
Exactly.
affiliation with the market.
I mean, there are some, we heard from a VC recently that said he does not invest in products that he uses. That's just one of his, he just doesn't do it.
Okay, that makes no sense. Okay, but okay. Was there some logic behind that statement?
It was during one of the office hours, and I think
It's so weird.
It just sort of he felt like it could cloud like the judgment. Like, I love this product, but I don't invest in the products that.
Oh,
I
I
love.
see. He might be saying I feel an unnecessary amount or an illogical amount of enthusiasm.
Right.
I think that's an important thing for founders to understand, of the reasons people give them money. In some cases, they might have an affinity for the founder. They know them. It's their, they went to college together, or they're friends or family members. And then there's like an affinity or an affiliation with the space. They love cars. So, they saw Rally Road, they want to do that. Or they're in the real estate space, they saw Neighborly, or they're a photographer, they love traveling. So they do Shoot My Travel, right? That's super valid as a way to get those early stage investors. But we're going to see a little more discipline on a VC investing limited partners money, where they're going to say, hey, is the Ford Foundation or CalPERS, California's retirement savings program or whatever, is Harvard, is endowment, those people who they invest on behalf of, are they going to get a great return? It's not about the investor's proclivity towards the product in that case. Okay, good. This is a great first slide. Let's go on to our next.
All right. So we're going to kind of walk through the funnel now in more detail.
Yeah. So in doing that, I mean, Demant works with the founders very closely. He's been through this process himself. So what are your recommendations on finding investors?
Sure. So the first thing to consider is that your focus and effort should be on finding a lead. And just to quickly define what a lead is. So this is the person that is typically the first person to commit to a round. And in general, they will set the terms of that round. They will help you get other investors into the round as well. And most often they will join your board. That's typically what a lead investor will do.
So they originate the term sheet with a list of terms that this deal will occur on. So they'll pick the valuation, they'll pick the board seat, major investor rights, et cetera. Information rights. And do we ever see a founder come up with the term sheet and then find a lead? Or is it...
That is extremely atypical.
Yeah.
An investor who leads rounds, that is their job. Their job is to understand what is the right valuation for this company, what are the right terms for it. That is what they do for their job, and so they will want to issue the term sheet.
So they'll originate the term sheet. What does it take to originate a term sheet? We've started doing that here at Launch more and more. In fact, you sent 3 this past week, I think. What does it take for you to originate the term sheet? What is the process we go through internally?
Well, I think internally we want to decide what percentage of the company we want to own and how much we want to invest. And so that equals valuation.
Right.
It's also just taking a look at, most firms will have a standard term sheet. They'll have certain terms that are non-negotiable. They
pro rata.
Pro rata. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But it's working with the founder and by the time we get to the term sheet, we know the founder well. We've met with them several times. Maybe they're an accelerator company for us, maybe not. But we're on the same page, and the goal moving forward is the same. So we're keeping, we're founder friendly in a lot of ways. We're also investor friendly, but we work with the founder to figure out the term sheet.
When you send a term sheet, there is a overwhelming expectation, 99%, that deal is going to close. Now, you may or may not have done diligence yet, but the term sheet is, hey, here's the big, broad picture strokes. We're going to do the deal. We're going to buy this many shares for this price. We're going to invest this much for this percentage ownership.
Yes, it is non-binding.
It is non-binding,
even when
but
you sign. And we'll talk about
how
term sheets
often
a
have
little
we
bit.
seen a term sheet go out and then not get closed? Not from us. That I think has never happened from us. Not that I know of.
I think we should look at this from two ways. I think from the investor standpoint, I think it would be a poor assumption to assume that 99 out of 100 term sheets that they issue would be accepted. That'd be interesting to get your take on how many term sheets from an investor standpoint would ultimately go through.
But if accepted, let's assume you send one, it gets accepted, everybody's ready to go.
Yes.
What percentage of those would actually be consummated? A wire transfer
signed
would
by
occur?
the founder.
Signed, and then a wire transfer occurs, and the deal's done.
Yeah.
Out of 100, how many would get done?
I would hope 100.
Yeah.
That should be a very rare exception that something...
I've seen one or two times in my career, I think, that a term sheet didn't. In one case, now I'm thinking 2 or 3. In one case,
I can think of
a firm blew up.
Yeah.
So the two partners broke up with each other, and then there was no money. And that left the founder in a disastrous situation where they had to take another term sheet that they scrambled to get at a much lower valuation with onerous terms. And I think it could potentially wind up being like the Achilles heel of the company now. So it really was terrible. Another term, there were things that came up in diligence that were not true. So in one case, it was on the investors. One case was on the founders. Yeah. You have any other cases you can remember?
None. No.
Okay.
I think same ones.
So you target a lead.
Yeah.
Lead
So
investor is going to price around. Got it.
And then really from a founder perspective, once you've got that lead, everything gets easier. So that's why, when we're talking with our founders, we make sure that they are focused on finding that lead. That's really typically the first block to fall.
Are there some investors who do not lead rounds and some investors who only lead rounds?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you know? It doesn't say that in Crunchbase. You would have to ask them, do you lead rounds?
Yeah, we recommend founders ask that question.
How would you ask it?
Do you typically lead rounds? And the investor should feel comfortable. I assume if a founder asks you, do you lead a round? Is that something that you would feel comfortable asking?
Yeah, we lead rounds in a small number of cases when the growth is extraordinary and or we have a deep relationship with the founder where we have real commitment and belief in their career. Yeah. So the fast growth to us would be doubling revenue every 3 months. We might want to lead the company. Or if we had a deep relationship with the company and they're doubling revenue every 6 months, but we really know the founder and we feel strongly about them. That's happened a number of times recently.
Sure. So now let's talk about, you understand that you're trying to target that lead. So let's, again, go into some more tactics around finding investors. So one of the primary sites that we recommend looking for investors is AngelList. And so in order to do so, what we recommend is to search for companies that would indicate that the investor has an interest in your company, but is not competitive with your company.
Okay. They would have an interest, but they're not competitive. What's an example of that?
I'll use an example from my past. I was the founder of a company called Bento. We did on-demand food delivery here in San Francisco. So I would often look for companies that were in the on-demand space, but not necessarily in the ready prepared meal space. So the example would be Instacart.
Got it.
So if an investor invested in Instacart, shows that they're interested in the on-demand and delivery logistics space, but Instacart was not competitive with Bento because they were
adjacent,
correct,
but not directly competitive. But somebody who was in Instacart might say, I think they're going to go into this business eventually, so maybe not.
Yeah, it's possible.
But one over from that might be Uber or Lyft before Uber did Uber Eats, and one over from that might be Airbnb was an on-demand housing, so they understand the concept of getting something quickly through a mobile app. I would also point out that Crunchbase now seems to have more complete data than AngelList, although AngelList seems to have more early information. Do you think that's correct?
Yeah. So we just wanted to talk about in terms of tactics with AngelList, but yes. So the other places we recommend founders to look is Signal by NFX.
Does that actually work? Because I signed up for it and it was my email. I have too many emails in my email box, so I had to delete my account because it seemed like it was chaos. But explain what Signal by NFX is. What does it do? How does it work?
Yeah, it's a good database in terms of being able to filter, and the data that we've seen, I don't have tremendous experience with it, but I've done some of our kind of investor searching for us in terms of getting investors involved with the accelerator has gone well, and then founders have also said that they've been able to find high quality investors
So
from
you
there.
authenticate with Signal by our NFX with your Gmail. It uploads your Gmail. It looks at who you've been trading emails with, which is super creepy, but it doesn't read your emails theoretically.
Yeah, I don't.
It's reading the header information. So it knows I've emailed with Mark Andreessen or Ruloff from Sequoia or Bill Gurley from Benchmark. It doesn't know the nature of those conversations. And then it could give you your path through your network to other people, sort of like 6 Degrees did back in the day.
Yeah, it's also a database. So
It's just straight up database.
I don't, unless I'm incorrect, I don't remember connecting my email address to be able to search that database.
Yeah, I think you can do it either way.
Yeah, and I was still able to find
That's cool.
a good list of investors. And then Crunchbase, of course.
Now, they seem to make you pay to go deeper into people's profiles. So I know we've been updating our profiles, and it seems like you have to go a little bit deeper now you have to pay. I don't know what it costs, but I think it's well worth it.
You also indicate whether or not you let around in Crunchbase. So that's another way of targeting a lead, is you can see what firms are leading or what investors are leading.
Okay, great.
All right. So final thing in terms of finding investors is let's talk about who to avoid.
Sure.
So we kind of mentioned in the previous one, make sure to avoid someone that has invested in a competitor of yours.
Sure.
And the simple framing that we recommend is for a founder to imagine that the investor invested in your company first and then asked you, can they invest in this other company? And if that would make you feel uncomfortable, then we don't recommend the reverse of that.
So you're the founder of Uber, and the investor says, "Can I invest in Lyft?"
Yep.
You're the founder of Airbnb, and I don't know what is it,
HomeAway,
or a Perfect Stay, or One Perfect Stay says, "Hey," say, well, that feels like the founder I backed originally would feel bummed out about it.
Right.
Okay.
So then not to do that. Also consider geolocation. Investors often do not want to invest outside of a 25-mile radius of their home. So if you're based in the Bay Area, targeting New York investors may not make sense.
Seems to be changing a bit. Investors used to require just 10, 15 years ago that if you signed a term sheet with them, you would move your company to Silicon Valley. It would be a term in the term sheet. No more. It's just too expensive here. There's no more room here.
And then the final one is if the fund is fully deployed. And so
how do you know that?
So the way we recommend is similar to leading and not, is to ask the question, what is the status of your fund? And actually it was a question that I was thinking for you, which is when a founder asks you the status of your fund, do you think that's inappropriate?
No.
And do you think they've overstepped?
Definitely not. I think they're savvy and they get more credibility with me. And you would have to have done your research. So if you came in and said, oh, I know you did 2 funds and you have the syndicate, how does that work? How much of your fund is deployed and how large is it? I read you have I think Fred Wilson and the Flatiron Partners all do, or Union Square Ventures, they all do $200 or $300 million very small funds. Other people do $1 billion funds. So asking them, hey, how much of the $1 billion is deployed? Would we be in your last fund or the next fund? And then what do you keep for follow-on investments for each company is a standard question to give as well. You also want to avoid, I think, investors who are not active. And I find that a lot of times investors might be between funds but still taking meetings, which is kind of weird. I don't know why they would do that. But asking them what their last 3 investments are, I think is fair. I wouldn't think that's overreaching. Asking who the LPs are would be the overreaching question. That's sort of controversial right now because you may not feel comfortable taking money from somebody who has Russian oligarch money, Saudi Arabian money, Chinese money, et cetera, because you have a feeling about human rights or democracy like I do. And so I'm finding a lot of people are asking, hey, who are your LPs? Now, you can't give them a list, but you could say, yeah, it's high net worth individuals and endowments. So Sequoia is pretty upfront about their LPs. Hey, we have all these endowments and people doing cancer research and nonprofits. And when we make money, they make money. And they make 70 cents of every dollar gained. And we get 30 cents on the dollar or 20, 80, whatever it happens to be.
I think it's also when you're talking about investors to avoid, it's good to consider your founder network. So look at who those investors have invested in and reach out to those founders just to get a reference. Maybe that founder had a really bad experience.
100.
And people want to share their experience.
You would be very surprised if somebody had a great experience, they're going to call you or email you back the same day. And if they had a bad experience with that investor, they're going to call you or email you back in that hour. Because if you had a bad experience as a founder with an investor, you want to let people know immediately. And I had another investor who had a real problem with a founder who they felt was unethical. And I emailed them and said, oh, I met with your founder. That founder hadn't mentioned my friend, but I saw it on their Crunchbase or whatever AngelList profile. So I just emailed him, and my phone rang 5 minutes. He said, did you commit? I said, no. And they said, oh, here's the story. And it was some really disastrous situation. And I passed on investing in that company because I was like, well, if 10% of this is true or 20% of it's true, this just seems too much chaos for me. So that works both ways. You already know Zendesk as the world's best customer support system. You know it, you love it, so do I. And they are giving an incredible offer. I'm going to tell you about the offer right now because it's so unbelievable. Qualifying startups, those are people with a Series B or below, and under 100 employees, get Zendesk for free for a year. Go to zendesk.com/twist, TWIST, and you will get started with that free year. And what you may not know about Zendesk is they have expanded their range of products into the Zendesk suite. That includes integrated customer support, a knowledge base with all those frequently asked questions and knowledge and goodies, live chat, because, hey, a lot of people do not want to pick up the phone anymore. They just want to chat and get an answer. And a call center, of course. Some people are still going to call. Some people like to call. Some people like to email. Some people like to chat. Viva la différence. And with all these customer support channels connected, you can do what Presh did here. Boom, sign up real quick at zendesk.com/twist. Bing, bang, boom, you're set up almost instantly. I mean, we're talking about under 10 minutes. You are going to be doing integrated customer support with that knowledge base, the live chat, and the call center software. And you can scale your business without needing to hire a lot of people. That's the point of using this technology, is leverage. Maybe you were going to hire 5 customer support people. Maybe you can hire just 3 or 4 and make them bionic with these incredible tools from Zendesk. And with their flat rate pricing, it is so startup friendly. Who are their customers? Who uses Zendesk? Peloton? Slack? Airbnb? Latote? Wouldn't you want to be in that company? I know I would. So go ahead and go to zendesk.com/twist to get started today.
So we're going to talk about the pitch deck next.
Yeah.
So when you're ready to meet with VCs, you'll need to make sure to have your deck ready. Ashley, what should a founder's deck consist of?
Yeah, so the deck should be about 10 slides, aim for 10 slides. But first, you can set your own expectations, manage your own expectations. Investors will ask for the deck ahead of time. And a lot of founders say, should I send them my deck? I'm going to be meeting about this.
Should
Would
they?
I? So yes, why not? There's a way you can look around it or another way of looking at it is you can send a teaser. You could send, 3-4 slides and then have the full deck at the meeting.
I consider the 10 deck slide a teaser. What do you think a teaser should be, Demant?
Yeah, I think 10 slides is a good length, depending on how much detail,
What
on each slide.
would be a full deck then, in terms of number of slides?
Well, if you're looking at, the appendices, you're looking at, you could be 50.
Yeah.
But I come from the camp of, I think 10 to 15 slides max. You don't want to use your deck as a crutch. This should be a conversation in the meeting. And we'll talk about the meeting also, but the deck should not take up all of the room, in that meeting. So I think 10 to 15 slides is about right.
Yeah. I might put it at 15 to 25, but I think this is like a preference thing.
Sure.
And it also depends on the stage of the business.
Sure, of
course. If the business is very early and you don't have many customers, you're like, well, here's 3 customers. But if you have 300 customers and last year you had 100, the year before you had 30, you might have a lot more data to look at cohorts and go even deeper. But I think sending the deck is fine. I would not use this DocSend thing, which a lot of us in the venture community are not clicking on DocSend links anymore because they're creepy. They track every mouse movement or every slide view. And I'm just like, send the PDF. Like, then I can open it and not worry that my IP address has been compromised, et cetera. So I prefer just sending a clean PDF.
But, and the thing too with this point is that some investors will want a link and some will want a deck.
Yeah.
So send a link and attach the deck. Makes it easy. You don't have to deal with someone saying, oh, I don't open links, or, oh, can you please send me a link?
Yeah. And do not send a giant PowerPoint. That is the rookie. I mean, sometimes I have PowerPoints that back when Gmail storage was an issue, you would do that search for attachment greater than whatever 5 megs. And I would literally have somebody send me a PowerPoint deck that was 400 gigs. I was like, what's in here? And they would have a movie in there. And instead of making it a clip and scaling it down, it was a 1080p 60-minute demo, which they had clipped a minute of, but still put the whole giant video in. It was crazy.
Yeah. So then when talking about the deck, you want to make sure that you're telling a story through it. It needs to be engaging. You don't want to lose an investor in your meeting because you're telling you're just presenting facts on a slide.
Yeah.
So the different slides that you should have in your deck, you should always start with, of course, the title page with your logo and contact information. This is the first page of the deck. If you're sending it, they want that. They want to know what your
so crazy
Twitter,
when people don't have the contact information in their deck, and you're like, "Where's their contact info? I got to call this person." Like, put your phone number.
Yes,
I'm down with that. Yeah.
And then if that page has your mission on it, then you don't need to include another slide, but another slide with, your mission or whatever your, 5 words that describe your company, your X for this, X for Y kind of thing. And then the product, what the product is, without kind of diving into the solution at that point, but just talking about the product quickly, talking about the team and you as the founder, why this team. And the order, of course, is subjective. Some investors will say, why didn't you talk about your team in the first slide? And some will say, I don't need to hear about your team until the very end.
Right.
So order, of course, can change, but it's important to mention key team members, of course. Not if you have a 50-person team, you don't need to list every person.
No.
It's just your key team members that are, part of the decision-making process. And then you want to talk about the current problem in the market size. So you want also using a bottoms up approach as the size of the market as opposed to top down. You're not saying, there are 7 billion people on the planet. So our market size is 7 billion because everybody needs to eat food.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And it happens.
Well, I mean, if you go to YC's demo day, it's like they only have 2 minutes or a minute. Maybe it's a minute. It's a 2. I don't know. It's 1 or 2 minutes. And they just scream out the market size. They say they're going to own 10% of it. And then they're shuffled off stage. You don't even see the product. And I think you really need to be able to credibly talk about your market size. And we say bottom up is the way to do that. So the example would be of the 7 billion. Say, well, we're going to do on-demand food. So that is analogous to takeout. And here are takeout restaurants that we think we'll compete with. We're trying to do a $6, $7, $8 meal, which competes with fast food and fast casual, but not restaurants. So we're, if you were going to order from Boston Chicken or Chinese food or pizza, that's our comparative product, not going to a restaurant or making your own food.
Yeah. So then next you'll talk about your solution and why you are the position to do that. And then also include your competitors. Everyone has competitors.
Yeah.
So it is a farce to say you have no competitors.
Yep.
Also, we have heard from a couple of VCs, but one woman in particular really said it well when she said VCs only understand either the 4-quadrant chart where you're up here and everyone else is way down in the
bottom left and your top right quadrant.
Or it's the grid with the check marks and your company, all of the check boxes are marked and everyone else is, 2 or 3. Yeah. So it's really, there's only a couple of ways to do that.
And just don't be intellectually dishonest. It's so weird when we're in a meeting with somebody and they have 3 competitors and they don't know who their competitors are, or worse, they're leaving them out because they're intellectually dishonest. And so when you have somebody who's building a competitor to Slack and they don't include Slack or HipChat in their deck, you're like, well, what about the 800-pound gorilla? There's this major competitor. And I don't know what's worse, stupidity or the intellectual dishonesty, but we see this all the time. I have no competitors. It's like, okay.
Yeah, well,
very rare that that's the case.
And then you want to talk about, your traction, how you are being validated by the market. And this is where you can talk about customer stories, user stories. Is good.
I think that's super important. If you have the goods, revenue, growth, and customers and customer testimonials, that is going to speak volumes. You explaining why your customers love your product is not as effective as your customers explaining why they love your product. That's why when you see great ads on Instagram or even TV commercials, you'll have somebody get on and say, hey, I use this product. I love it. I mean, that's why people use celebrity endorsers, right? To have somebody credible talk about their product. And if you have 3 or 4 people paying you for your product ask them for a Yelp-like quote. Can you give us a Yelp-like quote? Here's 3 or 4. And you could send them the 3 or 4 in a Google Doc or an email and say, hey, maybe you could even edit these, but hey, here's some ideas of what we're looking for. No more than 3 sentences on why you love our product.
Yeah. So then next, sort of rounding out your story, what we have more recently had our founders add is the road to 100 million.
Yeah.
So explain how much of this market you can capture and how you're going to do it. It's setting a plan. It can be very, very helpful. And then you'll just sort of, you end it with the ask. What this is what I'm raising, or this is what I need to
be direct.
Yeah, be very direct.
People come in and they end their deck, and I'm like, okay, how can we help? And they're like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I think it's interesting. And how can we help? And some people are just like, well, we'd like you to invest. I'm like, well, I thought that's why we're here. Like, that's what I do for a living. Like, just say, we're raising $3 million. We'd like you to be the lead. We're looking to raise $3 million to grow from $1 million in revenue to $7 million. We think $3 million gets us there. So now if you're talking about what the investment enables the company to do, so after you give me $3 million, we will have a company with $1 million in revenue. We want you to give us $3 million for 30% of the company, a $10 million valuation. After we deploy your $3 million over 18 months, let's say, we will, burn $150K a month, $250K a month, depending on the month in that 18-month run. And we'll have $7 million in revenue after that, and the company will be worth $70 million. Your $3 million will now be worth 7 times that. It'll be worth $21 million.
Yeah, it's okay to be optimistic too.
I think if you have a plan, you should pick a plan that is aggressive and challenging, but not absurd. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to do a 20-year or 10-year or even 5-year, projection. I think it's much more credible to do 2 or 3 years. Like, here's where we're going to get to in the next 3 years.
Yep. And then last on the deck is pay for excellent design. Unless you're a designer and you're incredible
Awesome.
at design, pay for it. We've seen decks that just look like garbage.
Yeah.
And so, for you obviously love good design, Jason. You usually even good design. That's something that I would say is like, oh, that's a 10. Jason's like, oh, that's a 6.
You just do 1 to 10 with no 8s, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody gives an 8 to be because you want to be nice, and I'm not here to make friends, Ashley.
You think I want to be nice? That's so. What a compliment.
Exactly. No, I think people, when you ask them, like, everybody wants to say nice or good or okay, and okay and nice in number speak is 8. But when you give people an 8, they will say 7.5, which means you got work to do.
Yeah, sure.
And 8.5 means you're pretty close to 9, so the work's pretty much done.
Yeah.
And that's where that's a nice way to put it. Is like, is there more work, a lot more work to be done here, or is it pretty close?
Yeah.
Sure.
But you had a question.
Well,
design.
With design, it's like it does. Most investors, it's a tell. And so for you, have you seen really bad decks that you've ended up investing in, or really excellent decks that you're like, oh, this is,
Here's what it's like. If somebody shows up and they've got a giant stain on their jeans and a rip on their t-shirt that they're not aware of, like, I'm not talking about like a fashionable rip. I'm talking about like an actual like tattered shirt, and they've got dandruff and their breath smells, and you're just like, oh my God, this person is a disaster. Like, they're showing up for a meeting and they have body odor and they have flakes coming out of their hair.
We don't need to make this personal, Jason.
I didn't mean to make it personal.
We've talked about this before.
And everybody has perfect hygiene in our company, but I'm using this for effect because I do think that's what bad design is perceived at by a certain number of people. Sure. It's like showing up without brushing your teeth. It's like showing up without combing your hair. Somebody asked me today, like, what should I wear for my internship? And I was like, well, dress to impress. Like, you want to show up and like look like you know what you're doing. And in today's age, it's so easy to get to an 8.5 in design. It will cost you $500 to polish your deck, $1,000, $250. Polish it up, make it, polish it, get some feedback, and then polish it again. And maybe each time you polish it costs $500, but man, does it make a difference.
Worth it.
Now, I don't think it ensures you're going to get the meeting or it ensures that you're going to get the money. You still have to have the chart. So if that person comes in who's a total disaster, but they have a chart where they're tripling revenue every 6 months, you're going to be like, okay, it doesn't matter. This person's just odd, but they have performance. So if you're odd and you have performance, okay, it's kind of like, oh, that's a weird person who's odd. Like Steve Jobs in his biography, or the biography that was written about him, they talked about how he was a fruitarian at some portion of his life and didn't believe in wearing deodorant, and that he just smelled like unbelievably horrible, but people would have to stay in the room with him because he was Steve Jobs and he didn't believe in deodorant. It's like a known story in the famous biography. So you can be eccentric and crazy like that, or you can be uncouth or rough around the edges if you have crazy performance. But you don't want to give people an easy reason to discount you. And that's what I think bad design is. Or typos or spelling errors. When there's a typo or spelling error, people are like, did you not read the deck? And if you didn't read the deck and there's a typo, or there's a math problem, somebody just alerted me to a math problem in one of the syndicate deals we did, and they were like, on this cell, there's a problem. And I'm like, whoa, you saw that, yeah? And I was like, okay, that's embarrassing. We didn't go through every single cell to find the problems, but that's what investors are doing. Like there's that guy who is the Excel jockey, and then there's that other person who's the design maven, and there's another person who's a product person, and like you will get an email from somebody who's like, I reset my password, it didn't work, and I'm not going to invest in your company now because I did the password reset, it didn't work. And they're like, oh yeah, I got caught in a thing. And they're just like, don't have the attention to detail for me to invest. So be careful. If you do not have the stuff tight, it gives people an easy reason to pass. And too many of these things signal that you're incompetent, or signal that you're not well put together and tight in a market where there are other choices. And that's really what this is about. There are other choices for people to make an investment. When we send 50 syndicate deals a year, our syndicate's going to, an active person in our syndicate might pick 10. That means they pick 1 in 5, 1 in 4. You're in a competition with other folks. The design is part of that. Your projections are part of that. Your ability to present is part of that. So get it right.
Yeah. So then once you have your deck, you're going to go to that first meeting.
Yeah.
So you need that for the first meeting. So how should a founder run this first meeting with an investor, Demant?
Sure. So the first thing we always recommend to founders is to remember that they're in charge. It's their company. They're the founder, and to go into the mindset that the investor would be lucky to have the opportunity to buy a portion of their company.
And come along for the ride.
Yep. So
be a boss.
Yep. Along with that, you'll want to set the agenda, and we instruct our founders to offer a 2-tiered approach on the agenda. So, you're meeting with Jason. Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mr. Demant.
I've got
Tell me about Bento.
I've got 2 decks ready to go through. I've got a 5-minute overview pitch, and that just goes through the product and some of our metrics. And then I've got a 15-minute more detailed pitch that also goes through more of our customer acquisition channels, cohort analysis, and some more detail around the metrics. Do you have a preference on which one you would like to go through?
Yeah, I'd like to go through the detailed one, and maybe if it'd be okay, I'd like to ask questions as you go.
Perfect.
And
so by asking the investor which deck they like to see, again, it shows that you have command of the meeting, but you're still looking to the investor to see what exactly they want to see and making the best use of the limited time that you have.
So I'm in charge, but I'm flexible.
Yep. And then the other point to remember when setting the agenda is oftentimes you will have investors that say they don't want to use the deck, they just want to have a conversation, and we do not recommend doing that. Oftentimes what will happen is you'll come out of the meeting and you'll have forgotten to hit one of your top main points. And so the deck, while you don't need to go through every single thing, you have to make sure you're going to hit every one of your main points, and using a deck is critical with that.
And if they insist, a very simple way to do that would be to have a printout of your deck with you, nicely bound, or color printed, which is not a big deal to do these days. Color printers are not expensive, and just have it with you. And while the person's asking you questions, talking, you could turn to page 6, customer acquisition. You could just say, you have the slide you have the deck in your email box. On slide 6, you'll see the detail here. Our CAC is this, and our lifetime value is this. So you can kind of reference the deck. I think is a smart way to do it. Like we're sitting here doing this, and I have the deck right here. And I like to flip through pages. I like to write on them. And I think considered people like to do that.
Yep. All right. So the other thing as you're preparing for the first meeting is to make sure to prepare questions for the investor. So the investors often have operational experience. They could be previous founders or have executive positions at high growth, have held executive positions at high growth startups, or just as being an investor, they've worked through multiple companies with growth. And so they are a knowledge base, and you as a founder should come out of that meeting say, at a minimum, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to learn about customer acquisition. I'm going to learn how they hired so many people so fast. So we recommend taking advantage, preparing questions, and then at a minimum learning from that meeting.
What have you seen? Because you've been with me for 5 years or so now, Ashley. 4 or 5? 4. 4. You've sat in hundreds of meetings with me. What do you think are the things that I tend to key in on when I'm meeting with founders? Because I could give my answers, but I'm more curious. As somebody who sits in the meeting and takes notes, you took notes for many years for me. What are the things you see me keying in on, and where do you see me maybe going deep with founders and, maybe getting closer to making an investment or having another meeting?
Numbers, number one, numbers. And you'll also do sort of quick math in your head of how many team members you have. Okay, so this must be your burn. And 90% of the time, you're absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
It's infuriating. It really is. But it's really, it's narrowing down to kind of like getting down to the nitty gritty details of their revenue, their customer base, how many, if they don't have revenue yet, what their customer, sort of interactions are looking like, how well they know their first 100 customers.
Yeah.
And then you want to learn about them and why they are the right founder, not your, which something you said, which I thought was brilliant enough to write down, was I want to know that you're going to work for this idea, not that this idea is going to work for you. And so you sort of drilling down to that. Yeah,
they have a sense of purpose and mission is super important, because we've seen so many times people snow us in a meeting that they're super passionate about something, and then, oh boy, we see them give up when they hit like a bump in the road. It's not even like a wall. They're just like literally hit a pothole and they pull the car over. I'm like, why is the car pulling over? It's like, we hit a pothole. It's like, really? Do you have a flat? Did the tire come off? Is the suspension break? No, but it shook us. And the car shook. It's like, get back on the track, But I think unit economics and understanding as an investor what's reality. So much of what we hear in these meetings and in these decks is polished and varnished. And we just talked about making a beautiful deck. You really are trying to get to reality. So I think if you can get the investor to reality quickly, you can actually get to a yes or no quicker. Mm-hmm. And that is super important for you, because as you're going through 150, you want to know who's out as quick as possible so you can focus on who might be potentially in. Mm-hmm. What founders do is they unconsciously are scared of the no, even though the no is the primary outcome. So get comfortable with a no and try to get to the no very quickly. Is this a fit for you? Our company? I have a great idea. I've got a mock-up and a prototype. Can I come to the accelerator? Can I do the syndicate? What would you say?
Nope. Too soon.
Too soon. Okay. What would I need to show to be in the accelerator?
Sure. So we are looking at consumer enterprise on consumer 5,000 plus daily active users or more. And growing double-digit percentage week over week.
Okay.
On enterprise, 5,000 a month in revenue.
Okay.
Kind of on a minimum side, growing 15+%.
What do I need to get in the syndicate? Okay, now I'm going to say I'm that company. So I have 5,000 a month in enterprise revenue. We're growing about 10% a month. Can I syndicate?
Syndicate? No.
Yeah. What would I need to syndicate?
Depending on your market, you'd need $75K in monthly recurring revenue. You'd need 20% month-over-month growth, at least 50% of your round closed, and have a lead outside of the syndicate. Yeah.
So when you ask an investor where you stand, what I just did was very quickly figured out, in both cases, I was too early. When I did the second case, pitching Ashley on the syndicate, that would have actually passed.
Sure.
With you. If I said to Demant, hey, I have got my enterprise software company is doing $5,000 a month, and we grew 12% month over month last month, and I've got 6 people on my team. Is that a fit for the accelerator?
It is.
Perfect. You should apply.
Yep.
Get to that point quickly. Don't be scared of getting that no. What that no means is not yet. That means, okay, now I know what I have to do. I know what clears market with Demant for Launch Accelerator, and I know what clears market with Ashley Whitehurst for the syndicate. And you write that down in your spreadsheet, in your CRM. Now you know. Why founders just extend the process of getting to know is beyond me. You want to get to that very quick no.
So wrapping up the first meeting, one thing we often remind founders is to make sure to nail down the action items in the meeting. So the best time to set the next meeting is in the meeting that you are in right now. So
that's a masterful trick.
Yeah. So you want to understand the process from the investor. You want to nail down the next steps, what kind of data you need to see, when to expect to hear from them. You want to do that in the meeting, not over email afterward.
Let me do that right now with Ashley. Okay, so we have $85,000 last month in enterprise revenue, and we grew 26% month over month. It was our largest monthly growth. We've got 9 people, and Jason Lemkin is co-leading the round. We've got 400,000 left. What would be a next step here for the syndicate?
Well, we've met and we like you. Then the next step would be due diligence.
Great. Awesome. So how do we do that? Would I do that with you, Ashley? Or would I do that with Jason or somebody else on your team?
Yeah, you do
Is
that.
there somebody I can...
You'd do that directly with me. I'll send you an email of the list of the things that we will need, as well as a few questions to get you started. And then if that looks good, we'll get started on a deal memo. And then once we launch the deal memo, it'll be 6 or so weeks until we fund the investment. Okay,
great. So I'll expect from you today the list of due diligence items, and I think I can get those together because we've put them together for Jason Lemkin. I can get those to you immediately, and then we'll get to the deal memo maybe by this Friday or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
So what I just did was your advice, Demant, which is just try to pin Ashley down for dates and when she's going to get me the action item. And that, again, goes to you're in charge. The first bullet point here is just try to run the process. Don't be run by the process, right? Okay, great.
All right.
After the meeting.
Yep. So, Ashley, what are some of the most important things for founders to remember after this first meeting?
Yeah. So remember your action items, and send an FAQ. After your first meeting, they'll likely, that investor will need to meet with their partners, or they'll, send some information to their associates for some due diligence. If you send them, a list of your frequently asked questions, you're ahead of the curve, and it will require fewer back and forth emails.
Got it.
And
I like that one. So it's just a list of questions. Oh, that's really great.
Yeah, and sending your deck, because especially if you've sent a teaser prior to, send your full deck after.
Okay.
And then the next is getting past associates. We don't want to discount associates, and we don't want to ever discourage founders from speaking with associates at large firms.
Explain what an associate is, just for context if people don't know.
So an associate at a venture firm is someone who is usually does some research, is on the investment team, but is not signing checks or making the final decision.
So they have influence, but not check writing ability. I think that's the best, most accurate description.
Yep. That's correct.
So they can be the champion inside a company. Frequently, they're younger, earlier in their career. So sometimes somebody who's 48 years old like me might look to somebody like yourself, Ashley or Demant, and say, hey, what do you think of this? Would this something you would use as a millennial or maybe a Gen Z person? And you'll see these associates who might be out of school, 26 years old, maybe 10 years into their career, 32 years old, something to that effect.
Yeah, they can help inform the decisions.
Right. But you want to get to a partner and make sure you have a partner who can sign a check.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. It doesn't hurt to have a champion inside the firm. So then also know after the meeting that no response does not mean a no.
Right.
If they're going to tell you no, you want to force them to tell you no.
Right.
And then also give you goals for, goals you can hit for what does a yes look like?
Most of the time, if you get no response, it means they're busy. They missed the email. You got to remember, these are super routers. I get 500 emails a day. I get through 200 of them. My net is typically minus 100 or 200, 300 a day on a bad day. And then sometimes on a Saturday, if the kids are asleep or something and I get 2 hours alone, I'll try to whip through 100 emails and try to catch up. Yeah. But yeah.
So in order to get a response, follow up, be persistent but not annoying, and send updates, especially metric-based updates from your meeting.
When would we hit annoying, Demant? Has anybody ever told you you're being annoying, or have you felt like you're being annoying? And what do you think about being annoying?
It's an interesting question. I think sending updates more often than once a week feels a bit on the annoying side.
Desperate, annoying,
yes.
weird.
Thirsty.
Yeah.
Thirsty. Thank you.
Yeah.
Millennials. Thirsty. Here we go.
It feels like the proper cadence is about once a week. Partners meet once a week, so typically at a VC firm they can only talk about a company once a week. So giving that update to make sure that perhaps they have that conversation in the partner meeting feels about right.
What I like for weekly updates is it shows that you're on startup speed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing quarterly, you're on publicly traded company speed. Yeah. If you're on monthly, you're at a growth startup. If you're thinking monthly, quarterly, you're probably in a growth or scale startup. Mm-hmm. And when you're public, you're thinking quarter over quarter. And when you're scaling, you're thinking quarter over quarter. So in other words, first quarter this year versus first quarter next year, or this quarter versus last quarter. Yeah. So second quarter versus first quarter. And it just shows the right cadence, right? And something can get done in a week that's meaningful. And don't send desperate, thirsty, crazy emails about your TEDx talk, because now you're signaling that you're focused on the wrong things. If you're going to send something, you got a great hire and they worked at Apple previously, or you signed 2 more customers, or you got 7 more people on trials, or you release some important part of your product. Money, hires of note, not we hired an intern, and definitely not like you spoke at a conference or you got selected as the 30 under 30, 40 under 40, 50 under 50, whatever nonsense. That's all bullshit.
I mean, if you really want to talk about your press, talk about what the press did for your metrics.
Yes. Now, if that's a perfect way to put it, because if you're using press as a strategy to land employees and partners, great. We had a story in Legal Journal, last month. You wouldn't know this, but it goes out to all the major law firms in the United States and in Europe, and we got 16 new trials for our product. Now you're like, oh, wow, this person's baller. Right. But if you're like, I got on TechCrunch, I'm on Mashable, like, unless you're building some dipshit, like, social app, like, that's not going to do anything for you. If you're like, my enterprise software got on TechCrunch, it doesn't do anything for you. It didn't send any customers.
Yep.
I also think when following up is make the follow-up meaningful. It's not like, hey, dummy, you get my last email.
Yeah.
It's, you're offering them some new information.
Right. So you're not just saying Jason ? Yeah. Jason ?
Ping to the top of your inbox.
Yeah, like that's the lowest form of kind of engagement. If you took the time to say, oh, Jason, I saw I heard you on Market Watch. Great hit. Now you're like, oh, you're paying attention to me. Great. You're interested in me. Like the Win Friends and Influence People book. You're showing some interest in me. And then adding to it, since we last met 3 weeks ago at your office, we have added 17 new customers. And one of them, IBM, is now spending $40,000, our largest engagement by a factor of 2. Would love to catch up with you. The round is going to close. Would love to have you involved in it. If not, would love to put you on our monthly updates and keep you updated and just understand what it would have taken for us to clear a market with you. Something like that, right?
Yep. So say you do get a no.
Yeah.
The last thing, don't ask that investor for an intro.
Oh, my God.
It's really
so dumb. Who came up with this stupid idea? I think it was a 500
news.
Startups idea or something.
Oh, really?
It's so dumb. I just know because when I went to 500, I said no because they were all too soon. This is years ago. They were all just like, do you know 3 other people? And I'm just like, do you want me to email 3 people and say, I passed on this investment? Because that's all they hear. They don't hear me say anything else. I passed. There's a book called Skin in the Game. What we do is we put skin in the game. Nobody cares about an introduction to somebody an investor did not invest in. With the rare exception, I'm a medical device investor. I have never invested in anything but medical devices, and I know Jason loves enterprise and consumer, and, I happen to meet you at the golf club.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's bad manners.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
From a tactical basis, you can always say, would love to know what are the 3 if an investor offers this, which happens to our founders, a great way to do it is take the recommendations from the investor, say, awesome, thank you for those. Let me research those and get back to you.
Sure.
Research them, don't get back to them, find other ways to get intro to those investors.
Right. You want to get an intro through a founder. That's the most powerful. When Thumbtacks founder Marco emails me or something, I'm just like, or, Raul from Superhuman, or, Alex from Com, of course I'm going to take the meeting and take a deep dive. These are people who've made me a ton of money and who are high executors, and they don't want to burn their relationship with me. You think I'm sending somebody to Sequoia or Kraft or Bill Gurley, Tremoth, willy-nilly? If something's not up to par, I'm not sending it to them. I feel conscious when I send it to somebody so much that I say, we've invested $1 million in Shoot My Travel. I think it's worth looking at. You notice I've been putting that in the emails. Yeah. We're an investor in this company. We like the founder for this reason. Boom. How many emails do I have? How many email intros do I have to do a month on average now? 200? What's the peak we've had in a month?
Yeah. I would 100, 150, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe
so
5 a day.
5 a day, 10 a day I'm doing.
Yeah.
And some days they get backed up. Somebody asked me to do 10 intros. I don't have the time to intro your company that I didn't invest in. I've got companies I've invested in that need intros. So again, just a totally horrible piece of advice going around the internet.
Okay, so your meetings were a success.
Woohoo!
Congratulations, you've gotten your term sheet, Demant. Yeah. How should founders go about negotiating their term sheet?
Sure. So first thing is we recommend is to take a holistic approach to the term sheet. Oftentimes, a founder will be fixated on price or just the pre-money valuation, and that's obviously a very important component of the term sheet, but you should also look at this holistically. Look at terms that affect economics and control, and we'll talk about those next. So the 5 most common terms that a founder should look for in their term sheet and consider are 1, pre-money valuation, 2, the liquidation preference, 3, the composition of the board, 4, employee option pool, and 5, pro rata. And as they're going through each of these, first as they're learning more about these, they should send the term sheet to advisors and their counsel. Those are the people that can help educate you on what is standard.
Yeah.
Because they have seen many term sheets you most likely have not as the founder.
And what's standard in Silicon Valley is very different than the rest of the world. So on the East Coast, we see people with liquidation preferences, super pro rata, which means they don't just get to maintain their percentage, they get to double their percentage in the next round, maybe warrants or advisor shares, maybe board control, all kinds of weird stuff that are what we would call out here downside protection. They're trying to protect themselves if the company doesn't work out. Out here on the West Coast, generally speaking, people are only concerned with how much they can win off of their outlier investments. They don't sweat the shutdowns. Yeah. On the East Coast, I've had East Coast investors say, well, what happened to the 6 MacBook Pros? Out here, it's like, oh, there's $25,000 in MacBooks you ordered. I saw it. What happened to those? It's like, well, we gave them to the employees as a departing gift instead of giving them severance, or we were going to give them 3-week severance and they could take their laptop and pay 1 week severance. So we did that, whatever it is. And they get freaked out about those kind of things. And what we're freaked out about is, okay, in our winners, do we have the ability to invest more? Did we take our pro rata in the winners? And that's been a change for me too, as well. As I've become more successful as an investor, what you start to see is, the wins are all that matter. Mm-hmm. So if you have a blowout loss in a basketball game in a 7-game series and you lose by 30 points, that does not count for 2 wins or 2 losses. It's 1 loss. Doesn't matter if you lost by 1 point or 30 points. Just move on to the next game and focus on that, right? And that's what investors need to do. For a founder, your valuation's important, but not in a vacuum. Liquidation preferences, there's standard terms here. Board, there's standard terms. People start to own 10, 20, 30% of a company. They probably want to have board representation. Option pool, pretty standard, 10 or 15%. Never lower than that, never higher than that. And pro rata, if you're a major investor, you invest over 100 or 250K, you're going to give them pro rata. Why wouldn't you? Yep. And advisors and legal counsel are super important. And if your cousin is doing your legal work and they do normally wills and, real estate, that's not the right lawyer to give you the standard advice. You want to have a firm, Scott Walker, Fenwick, Wilson Sonsini here. We have deep relationships with those 3 firms. Like, there are great firms out here who do this all the time, and they will tell you what's standard and not. And if the great irony or the paradox here is the most successful firms use the cleanest terms. The up-and-coming people who are scared and who haven't had success yet build all these complicated things because they're trying to protect their downside. Yep. So losers and or people new in their career are writing all kinds of weird stuff into their term sheets. Winners are like, yeah, here's standard. We own 8%. We believe that this is going to be a unicorn. Get back to work. And we don't need to negotiate or over-negotiate. You want 8% employee stock option, but 12, 10, 11. Who cares? Back to work.
Yep. As you're going through the term sheet, talking with your advisors, talking with your counsel, you want to start making a prioritized list. So not just fire, questions or negotiations back to the firm that issued you the term sheet. You want to have a list. These are the 3 or 4 things that we want to discuss, and here they are in order. And as the founder, you should be willing to move on some of those points and know which ones you are willing to move on and which ones you're not. So again, going back to taking a holistic approach.
What mistakes have we seen our portfolio companies make in this regard? Maybe like sending too many changes and then coming across as being difficult?
Yeah.
Signing too quickly and not understanding what you signed, I guess, is the other end of the spectrum.
I think it really boils down to, when negotiating a term sheet, is your legal counsel, honestly.
Yeah.
It's they're representing you, and if you're working with a Silicon Valley firm or investor and they're not familiar with the terms, it can really sour a relationship. So I don't know that we've really seen our founders make mistakes when negotiating a term sheet, but we have seen some founders make mistakes with having their legal counsel represent them, and they are just not familiar with any of the terms. So they look that they're just sort of ignorant. And
yeah, we had this happen with one company I was very fond of, and they were just haranguing me too much on email, like trying to change terms we already had, and then like lecturing me on like what's standard. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Because I was the early supporter of this company. Now they're oversubscribed, and I just pulled the plug on it. I just said, you know what? Buy half our shares back. I don't care what the rights are. We'll let the other half go for any insurance. I don't need to have some lawyer breaking my chops for hours over meaningless stuff. And I told the founder that. I was like, why are you sending your lawyer to me? We've been partners for over a year now, and they're grinding me down on really stupid stuff. And sometimes lawyers, especially ones who might be younger, they might be trying to curry favor with a founder or an investor on either side of the deal and fight for them. What they're fighting for typically is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Either these things work or they don't. And what they might be actually doing is making you come across as difficult to the other side. So I've seen founders walk away from insane investors who want crazy terms and pick a cleaner term sheet at a lower valuation. I've seen the opposite, and I have walked away from deals because I was like, you know what? If we're going to be arguing like this over meaningless stuff, like this is not fun for me. I have my choice of investments to make. Why would I sit here and be harangued like this? So it should be easy breezy, and it should be standard. Anything that's not standard on either side, investor or founder, is a massive red flag for the professional people in the industry. Yeah. So just keep it standard. Standard docs, move on.
The mistake that I had thought of was shopping your term sheet before signing. And so this is something we commonly see founders do, which is, they have one term sheet and then they just start bringing it around to everyone to try to get additional term sheets. Yeah. And that's a reasonable strategy, sure. But they also have to put themselves in the investor's shoes. Yeah. And an investor who gives you a term sheet, just to have that term sheet used as leverage to get better or different.
That's a bad feeling.
That doesn't make the investor feel good. And so there have been term sheets that have been pulled, and this has happened with our companies, because they have made the investor feel not special.
And sometimes there'll be a term limit. There'll be sign this term sheet within 48 hours.
Sure.
It's a 24-hour exploding term sheet, I guess they call it. And there's a very easy way to manage this. If you're in control of the process and you tell them, I'm doing 2 weeks of meetings, then I'm going to do follow-up meetings in week 3. I want term sheets in at the beginning of week 4, and then we're going to make a decision in week 5. That's our 5-week process. We're in week 2 right now. You're getting into the process late, so we might want to go, if you are interested, right from this phone call to a partner meeting, so you can have the time to put a term sheet in if you so choose. And So if you have your term sheet in on this Monday, we'll let you know on Friday which one we're going to take. So if they put in a 24-hour exploding one, you could say, well, I told you we're going to take a week to talk to our board about this. We have a board meeting on Thursday. We want the term sheets in by we have a board meeting on Thursday. We want the term sheets in by Monday. We may ask you to change some things so that we can present it to the board on Thursday, and then we're going to pick. That's controlling the process. Nobody feels bad. What feels bad is I got a term sheet, and then you showed it to somebody, which you would never do. You tell somebody that who the firm is. You don't need to tell. If a VC asks you, you got a term sheet from whom? You say, well, I'm not at liberty to say, but we would love for you to submit a term sheet if you're so inclined. We think what we're looking for is $3 million for 30% of the company.
Great. So let's go to our final slide, due diligence. So where exactly diligence happens is firm dependent, but most typically will do final diligence after a term sheet is signed. So Ashley, tell us, what should founders expect as they go through the diligence process?
Yeah, so the diligence process can be quite extensive. It can be a minimum of 3 weeks up to a couple of months. This is before the first meeting. This is after the first meeting. During the second and third meeting, and then finally to more formalized diligence with the financial and legal. Sometimes before, like you mentioned, but most often after a term sheet is the financial and legal diligence. So part of that diligence process is time and watching the company grow. So they just want some basic metrics to take a look at during that process. But in the beginning, it's important in all cases, it's important to respond immediately to any request for diligence. And this goes from that sort of light discovery that a partner might send over to an associate to, take a look at the market, research the market, and see if, validate the market size, use the product, light discovery diligence. And then they're going to get into more, diligence that they need your help with as the founder. So that's the next thing that we suggest is to create a data room for all levels of diligence. So you have everything that you will need throughout this process will be in that data room, and you can have a couple versions that you send right away.
Yeah.
And that means anything from, P&Ls and bank statements and Stripe download reports or Stripe reports, app download reports. These are your formation documents. When they get into legal diligence, they're going to need to see every legal document you've ever signed for your company.
Right.
So have a place for that now. I mean, if you're not in this process.
If you're organized, you should have good accounting, good legal, all this stuff should be in the right place. Now, you're not sending this with the first meeting.
No.
Or in the 150 emails at the top of the funnel. The proper time to do this is if they send a term sheet, they're going to go into diligence. And some might want to do some diligence before they sign a term sheet. And so it depends on the firm. Some firms will want to have talked to your customers before doing a term sheet, but they don't need to see your incorporation docs because we assume your accounting and your incorporation docs are clean. Here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to have something come up in diligence that's different than what you told the partner. Mm-hmm. And there's a term for this, material difference or material adverse information, just all kinds of fancy terms for you lied or something changed. You misrepresented something or something dramatically changed or something is not what it appeared to be. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's critical if you say to somebody, we have 4,000 customers and the average customer pays $1,000 a year, then you better have $4 million in revenue. It better not be that you have 4,000 customers, which are really users using the product for free, and 1,000 customers, and you said the average is 1,000, but the average is based on the last month's price increase, not the 900 you grandfathered in at $10 a year.
Right.
And how often do we find this in our process and in Accelerator? 100% of the time or 90?
Well, there could be different things that come up. I think
let's say clarity, that it needs to be more clear. How often do Accelerator companies need to be more clear about what they're representing?
Sure. Probably 70 to 80% of the time.
That's being more clear. And then
yes.
How many times do you think a downstream investor would consider the same information presented as such as misleading?
Yeah.
10% of the time?
I was going to say maybe 10%.
Yeah.
20% possible. 10%.
Which is too much.
Yeah, it is.
Don't mislead people.
Yeah.
If people are investing in the early stage, they don't expect it to be perfect. Now, we talked about what our expectations are for the accelerator and for the syndicate.com. We don't expect perfection. If you changed your pricing and it didn't work, in February your revenue went down, but it rebounded in March and into April, that's okay. We can deal with a jagged chart. If you change your pricing, if you lost your CTO or you lost your top sales executive, whatever, things happen. It's not supposed to be perfect. If the reason it's an opportunity for an early stage investor is because it's not perfect. Every every question has not been answered. So own the variability. It's okay for it to not be perfect. Don't massage the truth. It will come out, and it's going to come out at the worst time. You have a term sheet, you turn down the other 4. Now you're in diligence, and something turned out, like the story I tell in my book about somebody who told us they had Google and Facebook as customers, and they had an oral agreement with somebody they met at a party who they never followed up with. And they represented it as they had pilots, and they had them as customers. I was like, wow, that's a lie. And when you misrepresent something when selling shares, it's called securities fraud. The SEC does not, the principled people at the FBI, the SEC, these organizations do not mess with them. IRS, etc. Any 3-letter agency, you do not want to be in their crosshairs. Period. Keep it tight.
Yes, always. And then part of the diligence process is also customer references. I would recommend to founders that they protect these references. This isn't something you give before a first meeting or even just directly after a first meeting. If you're not seriously talking about a term sheet or have one signed, you should really push back on whether or not on them talking to customers, because you don't want to burn your references.
Right.
You don't
what
want
does it mean, burn your references?
You don't want them to have to be called. This customers are doing this out of the goodness of their heart. You know, you're not paying for this, which is obviously would not be ethical. But they like your product and they want to help you out. And so they offer you a favor to be a reference for your product. Yeah. You don't then want 15 firms calling them and, taking up, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes of their time.
2 or 3, maybe.
Yeah, 2 or 3, maybe. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and you want to have enough good references, you can do that. The thing that sticks out to me is the times I've had people not want us to call their references, it's been a major red flag. So the converse is, we've had instances where somebody says, I don't want you to talk to the customer because this other person did. And that actually translated into, we don't have great product market fit. This person's not going to say the thing we want to hear or we want you to hear.
Yeah, and I know the case. And I know the case you're talking about. And
that company went sideways.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we probably, if we had talked to those customers, it might have been enlightening. I don't know that, but I think it would have been. Because they didn't those customers, I don't believe, renewed.
Yep, probably. So, I mean, maybe the lesson is here, create a bigger pool of customer references.
Have customers who are delighted
in
general.
Have customers who are delighted.
Delighted enough to actually enjoy being a reference for you. And
yeah, but I also think it's like you're just, if someone asks for customer references really early in the process, I don't know that that's really a good sign.
You could have testimonials in your deck.
Sure.
And that serves that purpose. So when you have 4 testimonials from 4 real people, you don't expect the investor's going to call them and do a backdoor reference, which means they don't ask for permission, they just call the person. But you do expect that if they let you put them in the deck, that if you are in diligence, they would allow a quick phone call, 5 minutes. We do this 100% of the time now for the accelerator, correct?
For every investment, yes.
And we used to do it on the syndicate, and we were a little bit less so in terms of the diligence in an accelerator or an incubator, because it didn't seem like that was necessary. What we realized was it's going to happen at some point. We might as well train our founders to get good at this. And that's what we're trying to do, is we want to give our founders an unfair advantage. And that's what we're doing here with the series, is trying to give you an advantage. Hopefully you appreciate what we're talking about here. And then you email us, jason@launch.co, ashley@launch.co, demant@launch.co. Sorry, I got jason@launch.co. I was here before you. I registered the domain. We have the same name. But when you start your next company, you'll get to be Jason at your company again. For now, you have to be demant@launch.co. Common red flags in diligence?
So at this stage, we talked about it before in the first, that common, red flags are sort of, little errors in accounting in the P&L, not categorizing revenue, correctly, that sort of thing. At this later stage, it's not really what we're talking about. The red flags are one of them that we've actually had validated by a legal team recently is the state in which you are incorporated. Almost every single Silicon Valley VC will want you to be incorporated in Delaware. And so if you're not
a Delaware LLC
or a Delaware Corp.
C-Corp.
Delaware C Corp. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll just have to. That's not something that's not fixed. I mean, you can fix that.
Yeah.
But
pretty
that is
easy.
something. That's something that they'll say, hey, you need to fix this before we sign these documents.
Right. So if you have 6 weeks worth of runway, now you've added 3 weeks of flipping your company over to another state. Oh boy.
Yep. Exactly.
And the reason people use Delaware is it has very good shareholder processes when there's a conflict. We saw it with Uber when there was a shareholder conflict. When there's shareholder conflicts, it seems to be the most, the quickest and most effective venue for such things.
We make decisions based on litigation in the United States because we have a highly litigious population.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is why all the trolls were in Texas for the patent trolls moved to Texas because there was some advantage to that jurisdiction. So people do jurisdiction shopping. You should just know that. Other red flags?
Churn rate, customer churn rate.
That comes up over and over now.
It does. And they're going to ask you for cohort data and retention data for your customers. So have it, yes. I mean, that's something you have to sort of process at the time because they'll want recent data. But that's a reason that VCs will pass.
It's an easy one from the past. If you're losing 20% of your customers a month, it doesn't take a genius to understand that in under 5 months, you're going to have to replenish your entire user base. And you got a lot of people sampling, and you have what we have in the industry, what's called a leaky bucket. If Netflix lost 20% of their subscribers every month, it'd be an untenable business because their customer acquisition costs might be longer than 5 months, in which case they're just going to burn money. They're putting water into a bucket that has a giant hole in it.
Yeah. What do you think a reasonable churn rate is?
Well, I think single digits would be what most people would say. And if it's above single digits, you got a little bit of a challenge because that means you have to renew every year. So people are just going to times it by 12. So if you said, we've got 3% churn, 12 months, okay, that's challenging, but doable.
Yeah.
And then you could have negative churn, negative net churn, which is like you lose a customer who has 8 seats, but the other customer who has 18 seats added another 22. So you've added more seats to your product, but you might have lost customers. So you had some churn in names. So 2 companies went out of business. They stopped using Slack. But the 2 companies that didn't go out of business added more users than the users represented by them. So all of this is, I think, something that as long as it's reasonable, you're fine. But hiding it would be the issue.
Sure. I mean, two other reasons for red flags or not actually making the investment are around legal. So if you have, unresolved founder issues, or a founder that has departed and they still own a certain percentage of the company, they'll want that fixed. Or if there's any type of unresolved legal action or anticipated legal action. You're representing on these documents that I don't know. There has been no legal action. No one has sent us a letter. Nobody has complained. Yeah. And so if you can't honestly sign that, then it's something you have to talk about.
And it doesn't have to be a lawsuit.
Nope.
If somebody sent you a threatening legal letter, you need to put that in there.
Have to disclose it.
If you have somebody who says, I own the inside trademark because I did inside radio and I should own the inside trademark and I was going to raise money, I would need to be upfront about that. That hasn't happened. We have the trademark. But
those are in the documents too. Those are listed. Each complaint or legal action is listed in the documents you sign.
I had a dating app I wanted to invest in. I got pretty far along with them. And then when we were getting towards the end, said, and I happened to ask, are there any legal issues that you're dealing with or whatever? And she said, we have a patent lawsuit. It's like, from whom? And she's like, the same patent company that, put these 3 other companies out of business. And I was like, I don't want to be in the dating space. Like, if this is, you're going to need $250,000 to fight this patent and you're raising $250,000. What am I doing? Buying a lawsuit here? Like, and the fact that I might have been able to go work through that if it had come up earlier in the process. So again, surprises are the key issue here.
Yep. Exactly.
Own it going in. Okay. This has been amazing. If you want to get this deck, which we're going to make a couple of tweaks to, you can go to thisweekinstartups.com/scale. If you want to go to the accelerator, what's the best thing for them to do?
launchaccelerator.co. All information on there, including application and an FAQ that has terms and so forth.
And the syndicate.com will go from being a type form to being a platform at the Angel Summit. So we'll have an announcement about that in a couple of months.
Yeah, exciting.
Exciting. And you can go there now and apply to be a member, or you can apply to have your startup syndicated.
Yep. Thesyndicate.com.
Thesyndicate.com. Thank you, Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie and Nick on the ones and twos. Welcome to town, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.